Men are moved by two levers only: fear and self-interest. Napoleon Bonaparte. Most people believe success is about individual effort. They think working harder, being smarter, or having more talent is the only way to get ahead. This is a comfortable lie, a self-serving narrative that prevents them from seeing the real game. They focus on isolated actions, blind to the underlying systems that dictate outcomes. They're playing checkers while the world is playing chess. They are reacting to events while we are engineering them. Their world is defined by immediate problems, short-term gains, and a constant state of crisis management. They chase symptoms, never addressing the root causes. We, on the other hand, understand that lasting success is not about isolated actions, but about identifying and leveraging systemic advantages. It's about understanding the rules of the game and then rewriting them in your favor. It's about building systems that generate success almost automatically, regardless of individual effort. The difference between them and us is not just intelligence, it's awareness. It's the conscious decision to step back, analyze the playing field, and position ourselves to win not through brute force but through strategic mastery of the systems at play. They fight for scraps, we build the table. They see obstacles, we see leverage points. They react, we design. They attribute success to luck, we attribute it to systemic advantage. The game isn't fair and we don't pretend it is. But understanding the system allows us to tilt the odds dramatically in our favor. While they are busy playing the game, we are busy changing the rules. This is not about being unethical or manipulative. It's about recognizing the inherent power dynamics that exist in any system and using that knowledge to create a sustainable, winning strategy. It's about building a structure that supports your goals, a framework that amplifies your efforts, a network that protects you from unforeseen threats. The average person is trapped in a cycle of reactive behavior, constantly responding to external forces. We break free from this cycle by proactively shaping our environment. We identify the key leverage points in any system and exploit them to our advantage. We understand that small changes in the right places can have a disproportionately large impact on the overall outcome. This is not about working harder, it's about working smarter. It's about focusing our energy on the activities that generate the greatest return, rather than wasting our time on tasks that have little or no impact. It's about building systems that automate repetitive tasks, freeing up our time and energy to focus on more strategic initiatives. The world is a complex and interconnected system, and those who understand how it works are the ones who will ultimately succeed. We are not simply players in the game, we are architects of the game. We design the rules, we control the flow of information, and we shape the incentives that drive behavior. The ability to seize systemic advantage begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, moving from a localized, short-term focus to a broader, long-term view. Most individuals are preoccupied with immediate concerns, reacting to the pressures and demands of the moment without considering the wider implications of their actions. They are trapped in a cycle of cause and effect, constantly chasing symptoms without ever addressing the underlying causes. This reactive approach leaves them vulnerable to manipulation and control, as they are always one step behind the curve. True strategic thinking requires us to break free from this cycle and adopt a more proactive, systemic mindset. We must learn to see the interconnectedness of all things, recognizing that every action has a ripple effect that extends far beyond its immediate consequences. This requires us to cultivate a deep understanding of human psychology, anticipating how others will react to our moves and designing our strategies accordingly. We must understand the biases and cognitive limitations that cloud people's judgment, the emotional triggers that can be exploited to influence their behavior, and the social dynamics that shape their perceptions of reality. By mastering these principles, we can create a system that is not only efficient and effective, but also resilient and adaptable. We can anticipate challenges, mitigate risks, and capitalize on opportunities that others fail to see. This is not about being smarter than everyone else. It's about seeing the world in a different way, recognizing the underlying patterns and structures that govern human behavior. Our psychological landscape is often the most overlooked battlefield in the quest for systemic advantage. We are creatures of habit, driven by subconscious biases and emotional impulses that often undermine our best intentions. Understanding these internal forces is crucial for both self-mastery and the ability to influence others. Consider the concept of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we experience when holding conflicting beliefs or values. People are naturally inclined to reduce this discomfort by altering their beliefs or behaviors to align with their actions. A skilled strategist can exploit this tendency by creating situations that induce cognitive dissonance in their opponents, forcing them to make choices that are ultimately detrimental to their own interests. Similarly, understanding the power of social proof, the tendency to conform to the behaviors and beliefs of those around us, can be used to create a sense of momentum and legitimacy for our own ideas. By carefully curating our environment and surrounding ourselves with individuals who share our values and support our goals, we can create a self-reinforcing system that amplifies our influence and strengthens our resolve. This is not about manipulating others. It's about creating a positive feedback loop that encourages collaboration and cooperation. It's about building a culture of excellence that inspires everyone to perform at their best. Moreover, the human tendency to overestimate their own abilities and underestimate the power of external forces is a common pitfall. This illusion of control can lead to overconfidence, poor decision-making, and ultimately, failure. A true strategist recognizes the limits of their own knowledge and abilities, seeking out diverse perspectives and actively soliciting feedback from others. They are constantly questioning their assumptions, challenging their biases, and refining their mental models of the world. This requires a willingness to be wrong, to admit mistakes, and to learn from experience. It also requires a deep sense of humility, recognizing that success is never guaranteed and that even the most carefully laid plans can be derailed by unforeseen circumstances. The key is to develop a flexible and adaptable mindset, constantly monitoring the environment for changes and adjusting our strategies accordingly. We must be prepared to pivot when necessary, to abandon failing plans, and to embrace new opportunities as they arise. This requires a strong sense of self-awareness, understanding our own strengths and weaknesses, and leveraging them to our advantage. It also requires a deep understanding of the competitive landscape, anticipating the moves of our rivals and developing counter-strategies to neutralize their threats. Building systemic advantage requires not just intellectual understanding, but also emotional resilience. The path to success is rarely smooth. It is filled with setbacks, obstacles, and unexpected challenges. The ability to persevere in the face of adversity, to maintain focus on our long-term goals, and to learn from our mistakes is crucial for achieving sustained success. This requires cultivating a strong sense of self-belief, an unwavering conviction in our ability to overcome any obstacle. It also requires developing a support network of mentors, advisors, and peers who can provide encouragement, guidance, and constructive criticism. Surrounding ourselves with positive influences and avoiding toxic relationships is essential for maintaining our mental and emotional well-being. We must also learn to manage our stress effectively, developing healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with the pressures of high-stakes situations. This may involve practicing mindfulness, engaging in regular exercise, or simply taking time to disconnect from the demands of the world and reconnect with ourselves. The key is to find activities that help us to recharge our batteries, to restore our mental clarity, and to maintain a sense of perspective. By taking care of our mental and emotional health, we can ensure that we are always operating at our best, ready to face any challenge that comes our way. This is not about being invincible, it's about being resilient. It's about developing the mental and emotional fortitude to withstand the inevitable storms of life and to emerge stronger and more resilient than before. Ultimately, the pursuit of systemic advantage is a lifelong journey of learning, growth, and self-discovery. It requires a commitment to continuous improvement, a willingness to challenge our assumptions, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge. It also requires a deep sense of ethical responsibility, recognizing that power comes with a responsibility to use it wisely and for the benefit of all. We must strive to create systems that are not only efficient and effective, but also fair and just. We must be mindful of the impact our actions have on others and strive to create a world that is more equitable and sustainable for future generations. This is not about achieving personal gain at the expense of others. It's about creating a win-win scenario where everyone benefits from our success. It's about building a legacy that we can be proud of, a legacy that reflects our values and our commitment to making the world a better place. The pursuit of systemic advantage is not simply about winning the game. It's about changing the game for the better. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and to reach their full potential. It's about building a future that is worthy of our aspirations. Consider the story of a renowned tech company, a titan in its industry, that seemingly overnight found itself facing a catastrophic PR crisis. A series of whistleblowers emerged, detailing a culture of unchecked power, where innovation was prioritized above all else, even ethical considerations. The company had, for years, cultivated a systemic advantage by ruthlessly exploiting loopholes in regulations, pushing the boundaries of consumer privacy, and stifling dissent within its ranks. This advantage, however, was built on a foundation of sand. The executives, blinded by their own success, failed to recognize the inherent fragility of their position. They believed that their technological prowess and market dominance made them untouchable, immune to criticism or accountability. They underestimated the power of public opinion, the potential for regulatory backlash, and the moral compass of their own employees. The cracks in their system began to appear slowly at first, subtle murmurs of discontent that were easily dismissed. But as the whistleblowers gained momentum, their voices amplified by social media and investigative journalism, the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Consumers, once loyal and enthusiastic, began to question the company's motives, its values, and its very existence. Regulators, facing mounting pressure from the public and politicians, launched investigations, threatening hefty fines and even criminal charges. The company's stock price plummeted, investors panicked, and the board scrambled to contain the damage. In the aftermath, the company was forced to undergo a painful reckoning. Executives were ousted, policies were rewritten, and a massive public relations campaign was launched to repair its tarnished image. But the damage was done. The company's reputation was permanently scarred, its market share diminished, and its ability to innovate stifled by the weight of its past transgressions. This serves as a potent illustration of the perils of pursuing systemic advantage without a strong ethical foundation. It demonstrates that true and sustainable success cannot be achieved by exploiting loopholes or trampling on the rights of others. It requires a commitment to transparency, accountability, and a genuine concern for the well-being of all stakeholders. The company's downfall was not simply a matter of bad luck or unforeseen circumstances. It was a direct consequence of its own choices, its own values, and its own systemic flaws. It serves as a cautionary tale for any organization that seeks to build a lasting legacy. The pursuit of systemic advantage should never come at the expense of integrity. It must be guided by a strong moral compass and a commitment to creating value for all, not just a select few. In this case, the relentless pursuit of dominance created a fragile, ultimately self-destructive system. The company prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability, and it failed to recognize that its greatest asset was not its technology, but its reputation. The weak consistently fall into predictable traps because they fail to grasp the interconnected nature of systems. They fixate on immediate problems, reacting to symptoms rather than diagnosing the underlying disease. This reactive approach leaves them perpetually vulnerable, always fighting fires instead of building fire-resistant structures. They lack the foresight to anticipate consequences, the discipline to delay gratification, and the strategic depth to maneuver within complex environments. Instead, they rely on impulsive actions, emotional reasoning, and a naive belief that things will simply work out. Their thinking is linear, not systemic. They see a single cause and effect, failing to recognize the web of dependencies that shape reality. This blindness leads to repeated failures, each one reinforcing their sense of helplessness and further diminishing their capacity for strategic thought. They become trapped in a cycle of reactivity, perpetually scrambling to catch up, never gaining the upper hand. The inability to think systemically often stems from a deeper psychological vulnerability, a fear of complexity. Faced with a multitude of interacting factors, the weak retreat into simplistic narratives, clinging to familiar explanations that offer a false sense of control. They prefer the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. This aversion to complexity makes them easy targets for manipulation. They are susceptible to propaganda, conspiracy theories, and charismatic leaders who promise simple solutions to complex problems. They fail to question assumptions, challenge authority, or engage in critical thinking. Their minds become echo chambers, reinforcing existing biases and shutting out dissenting voices. This intellectual stagnation further weakens their ability to navigate the world effectively, making them even more vulnerable to exploitation. The trap, therefore, is not simply a matter of intellectual deficiency, but a psychological predisposition to avoid the hard work of understanding complex systems. Furthermore, the weak often mistake activity for progress. They equate busyness with productivity, filling their days with tasks that provide a superficial sense of accomplishment but contribute little to long-term goals. They are masters of efficiency, optimizing processes within a broken system, never questioning the system itself. They become trapped in a cycle of endless activity, working harder and harder without ever achieving meaningful results. This frantic activity serves as a distraction from their underlying fear of failure. By staying busy, they avoid confronting their limitations, postponing the difficult decisions that require strategic thinking and calculated risk. They become prisoners of their own routines, blindly following established procedures without ever questioning their effectiveness. This lack of self-awareness prevents them from identifying systemic flaws and adapting to changing circumstances. They remain stuck in a rut, destined to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. A crucial aspect of this trap is the failure to understand the importance of feedback loops. The weak tend to ignore or misinterpret information that contradicts their existing beliefs. They create closed systems of thought, insulated from external reality. This selective filtering of information prevents them from learning from their mistakes and adapting their strategies accordingly. They become increasingly detached from the real world, operating on the basis of outdated assumptions and flawed perceptions. This disconnect leads to disastrous consequences, as their actions become increasingly misaligned with reality. They are like ships sailing without a compass, drifting aimlessly without any sense of direction. The key to escaping this trap is to embrace feedback, actively seek out dissenting opinions, and constantly challenge one's own assumptions. Only by remaining open to new information can one hope to navigate the complexities of the modern world and avoid the pitfalls of systemic failure. Finally, the weak often prioritize short-term gratification over long-term sustainability. They are driven by immediate needs and desires, sacrificing future gains for present pleasures. This myopic focus prevents them from investing in the future, building resilience, or creating lasting value. They become trapped in a cycle of debt, dependence, and desperation. They are willing to compromise their integrity, betray their values, and exploit others for short-term advantage. This short-sightedness ultimately undermines their own well-being, as their actions create a ripple effect of negative consequences that reverberate throughout the system. The pursuit of short-term gains leads to systemic instability, creating a fragile and unsustainable environment. The key to escaping this trap is to cultivate a long-term perspective, prioritize delayed gratification, and invest in the future. By focusing on building sustainable systems, one can create lasting value and achieve true and enduring success. The Machiavellian approach understands that seizing systemic advantage often requires a calculated detachment from conventional morality. It's about recognizing the underlying power dynamics at play and exploiting them to achieve a desired outcome, irrespective of popular opinion. This isn't about being inherently evil, but about seeing the world as it truly is, a complex web of competing interests, where the spoils go to those who understand how to navigate the system most effectively. The average person is often hampered by sentimentality, a reluctance to challenge established norms, or a fear of social repercussions. These inhibitions can be exploited by those who are willing to set them aside. Think of it as a game of chess. The best players aren't necessarily the kindest, but they are the most strategic, willing to sacrifice pawns to gain a more advantageous position. This involves a dispassionate assessment of the situation, identifying the vulnerabilities of opponents, and skillfully maneuvering to exploit those weaknesses. The Machiavellian mindset is about recognizing that the rules are often arbitrary and can be bent or broken to achieve a desired outcome. It's about understanding that perception is often more important than reality, and that shaping public opinion can be a powerful tool. This requires a deep understanding of human psychology, the ability to anticipate the reactions of others, and the willingness to manipulate those reactions to one's own advantage. It also requires a degree of self-awareness, recognizing one's own biases and weaknesses, and taking steps to mitigate them. This doesn't mean succumbing to paranoia, but rather maintaining a healthy skepticism and a willingness to question everything. The cultivation of a Machiavellian strategy requires patience and a willingness to play the long game. It's about building a network of alliances, cultivating influence, and positioning oneself for future opportunities. This may involve making sacrifices in the short term, enduring criticism, or even engaging in deception. However, the ultimate goal is to create a systemic advantage that will pay dividends over time. This requires a deep understanding of the environment, including its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It also requires a clear vision of the future and a strategic plan for achieving that vision. This plan should be flexible and adaptable, allowing for adjustments as circumstances change. It also requires the ability to communicate effectively, persuading others to support the vision and to work towards its realization. This involves crafting a compelling narrative, appealing to people's emotions, and building consensus around a common goal. The Machiavellian approach also recognizes the importance of maintaining a degree of secrecy. Openly declaring one's intentions can alert opponents and allow them to take countermeasures. It is often more effective to operate discreetly, building alliances behind the scenes and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. This requires a high degree of self-control, the ability to keep one's emotions in check, and the willingness to deceive others when necessary. However, it is important to remember that deception can be a risky strategy, and it should only be used when the potential rewards outweigh the potential risks. Furthermore, a Machiavellian individual understands the power of information and actively seeks to control its flow. This may involve gathering intelligence on opponents, disseminating propaganda to shape public opinion, or even suppressing information that could be detrimental to their interests. The goal is to create an environment where one's own narrative dominates and opposing viewpoints are marginalized. This requires a deep understanding of the media landscape, the ability to craft compelling messages, and the resources to disseminate those messages effectively. It also requires a willingness to engage in psychological warfare, using tactics such as disinformation, manipulation, and intimidation to undermine opponents and sow discord. However, it is important to be aware of the ethical implications of these tactics and to consider the potential consequences of their use. The Machiavellian approach is not about being reckless or impulsive. It is about being calculating and strategic, always weighing the potential risks and rewards before taking action. It's about understanding that the world is a complex and often unforgiving place, and that those who are unwilling to play the game by its rules will often be left behind. This requires a degree of ruthlessness, a willingness to make difficult decisions, and the ability to accept the consequences of those decisions. But it also requires a sense of responsibility, a recognition that power comes with obligations, and a commitment to using that power for the greater good. Ultimately, the Machiavellian approach is about achieving a desired outcome, but it is also about leaving a lasting legacy. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen based on their ability to seize and maintain systemic advantage. Consider the Roman Empire, a civilization that dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries. Their success was not simply due to military might, although their legions were certainly formidable. It was their mastery of systems, infrastructure, law, administration, and communication that allowed them to project power and maintain control over a vast and diverse territory. The Roman road network, for example, was not just a means of transportation. It was a strategic asset that facilitated the movement of troops, goods, and information, allowing Rome to respond quickly to threats and to integrate conquered territories into its economic and political system. Similarly, Roman law provided a framework for governance that was both consistent and adaptable, allowing the empire to maintain order and stability across a wide range of cultures and social structures. The Roman bureaucracy, though often criticized for its inefficiency, was nevertheless a sophisticated system for managing resources, collecting taxes, and administering justice. These systems, taken together, created a systemic advantage that allowed Rome to outcompete its rivals and to maintain its dominance for centuries. However, the Roman Empire also provides a cautionary tale. As the empire grew, its systems became increasingly complex and bureaucratic, making them vulnerable to corruption, inefficiency, and internal conflict. The cost of maintaining a large standing army and an extensive bureaucracy placed a strain on the empire's resources, leading to economic instability and social unrest. Furthermore, the empire's reliance on slave labor stifled innovation and created a system of inequality that ultimately undermined its social fabric. These internal weaknesses, combined with external pressures from barbarian invasions, eventually led to the empire's decline and fall. The lesson here is that systemic advantage is not static. It must be constantly maintained, adapted, and improved in order to remain effective. A system that becomes rigid, inflexible, or overly complex is likely to become a liability rather than an asset. The art of war provides another compelling example of the importance of systemic advantage. Throughout history, successful military campaigns have been characterized by a deep understanding of the operational environment, the capabilities and limitations of one's own forces, and the vulnerabilities of the enemy. Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist, emphasized the importance of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy, arguing that only through such knowledge can one hope to achieve victory. This requires not only intelligence gathering and analysis, but also a clear understanding of the underlying systems that govern warfare, logistics, communication, technology, and morale. A commander who can effectively manage these systems and who can exploit the vulnerabilities of the enemy's systems is far more likely to achieve success on the battlefield. Consider the example of blitzkrieg tactics employed by the German army in the early years of World War II. The Germans did not simply rely on superior firepower or manpower. They developed a new system of warfare that combined armored formations, air support, and mobile infantry to achieve rapid breakthroughs and encircle enemy forces. This system, which was based on speed, coordination, and flexibility, allowed the Germans to overwhelm their opponents, even when they were outnumbered or outgunned. However, the success of blitzkrieg was also dependent on certain conditions. favorable terrain, surprise, and the ability to maintain momentum. When these conditions were not met, as in the case of the invasion of the Soviet Union, the limitations of the Blitzkrieg system became apparent, and the Germans suffered heavy losses. The importance of systemic advantage extends beyond the realms of empires and warfare. In the world of business, for example, companies that can develop and maintain a competitive advantage are far more likely to succeed in the long run. This might involve creating a superior product or service, developing a more efficient production process, building a stronger brand, or establishing a more effective distribution network. However, in order to be truly sustainable, a competitive advantage must be based on a systemic advantage, a combination of factors that are difficult for competitors to replicate. This might involve proprietary technology, unique intellectual property, a strong corporate culture, or a deep understanding of the market. Companies that focus solely on short-term gains without building a systemic advantage are likely to be vulnerable to competition and to experience fluctuating fortunes. In the realm of personal development, the concept of systemic advantage can be applied to achieving one's goals and aspirations. Whether one is seeking to improve their health, advance their career, or build stronger relationships, it is important to develop a system that supports their efforts. This might involve setting clear goals, creating a structured plan, developing effective habits, and building a supportive network. By focusing on the underlying systems that drive success, one can increase their chances of achieving their desired outcomes. However, it is also important to be adaptable and to